There are places in this world that just feel wrong. Corners of the map that time seems to have bypassed, leaving them to rot and fester in silence. But what if a place wasn't just forgotten? What if it was intentionally erased? Deep in the forests of northwestern Connecticut lies the ghost of a town you can never visit. A place so steeped in madness, death, and supernatural horror that its name has become a whispered warning. This isn't a tourist attraction. This isn't a collection of quaint ruins. This is Dudley Town, a place many believe is so fundamentally evil, it had to be locked away from the world. The stories claim a curse, born from treason and an executioner's axe 5 centuries ago, followed a family across an ocean and took root in this very soil. They say it drove families to insanity, caused mysterious illnesses, and led to a string of bizarre and violent deaths. The legends grew so powerful, so terrifying, that in the 1970s, the world's most famous paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren, were called in. Their conclusion wasn't ghosts. It wasn't a simple haunting. They declared the very land itself to be demonically possessed. Today, the area is private property, strictly forbidden to outsiders, patrolled, and protected. The question isn't just what happened in Dudley Town. The question is it still happening? Before we get into the centuries of terror that birthed this legend, you have to understand what Dudley Town is today: a void. An absence. It's a place that actively rejects your presence. Getting there is impossible, and that's by design. The settlement's remains are buried deep within a privately owned tract of woods known as the Dark Entry Forest. The name itself feels like a warning, doesn't it? It's a name that predates the ghost stories, a geographical descriptor that perfectly captures the unnerving character of the land. The forest is located in a valley, shadowed by the looming presence of 3 mountains. These hills form a natural barrier, casting the valley into a premature twilight for much of the day. Even at high noon, people have reported an unnatural gloom that clings to the trees. The sunlight seems to struggle here, like it's being suffocated by the sheer density of the woods. This perpetual shadow is more than just a lack of light, it creates an oppressive atmosphere that many who ventured near the area have described. They talk about a silence that's too profound, too complete. Not the peaceful quiet of the deep woods, but an empty, waiting silence. It's a place where the normal chorus of woodland life seems to have been muted. The birds, the squirrels, the deer, legend says most animals instinctively avoid the core of the old settlement, leaving behind an unnatural stillness that unnerves even the most hardened skeptics. The owners of this land, the Dark Entry Forest Association, don't see themselves as custodians of a historical landmark. They are guardians against a threat, not from the supernatural, they'd argue, but from the living. For decades, the legend of Dudley Town has been a magnet for thrill-seekers, ghost hunters, and vandals. The aftermath of the 1999 film The Blair Witch Project saw a massive surge in trespassers, hoping to find their own real-life horror story. They came with cameras and Ouija boards, leaving behind litter, graffiti, and campfire remnants. Police were called to the area constantly. In response, the association sealed the area off completely. Today, a drive down the adjacent roads, like the ominously named Dark Entry Road, will greet you with stern, unambiguous warnings. No trespassing. Private property. These aren't suggestions, they're backed by the full force of the law. Local police are quick to respond, and arrests are made promptly. The message is clear: you are not welcome here. Stay out. This strict prohibition has, of course, only fueled the legend. Why such extreme measures? Is it just to prevent vandalism, as the owners state? Or are they trying to contain something else? This wall of secrecy transforms Dudley Town from a historical oddity into a tantalizing, terrifying mystery. The act of forbidding entry makes the imagination run wild. What horrors must lie within those woods that they need to be so fiercely protected? The inability to see for ourselves forces us to rely on the stories, the dark, chilling tales passed down for generations, tales that begin with an executioner's axe half a world away. Every curse has to start somewhere, a moment of sin that unleashes a torrent of suffering. To find the origin of the evil said to plague Dudley Town, we have to travel back in time, away from the quiet Connecticut woods, to the treacherous, blood-soaked courts of 16th century England. The year is 1510. King Henry VIII is on the throne, and the air is thick with political intrigue. The story begins with a man named Edmund Dudley. He wasn't a king, but he was powerful, a nobleman and a key minister to the previous king, Henry VII. But power in the Tudor court was a fickle thing. When his royal protector died, Edmund Dudley found himself on the wrong side of the new regime. He was accused of treason. The trial was a sham, the verdict preordained. Edmund Dudley was found guilty and, on a summer day in 1510, he was publicly beheaded. According to the legend, the foundational myth of everything that follows, a curse was placed on him and his entire bloodline, a stain that would follow the name Dudley through the generations. It was a curse of eternal misfortune, madness, and violent, unnatural death. Now, this is where historians and genealogists pump the brakes. They've pored over records and have found no provable genealogical link between this executed English nobleman and the Dudleys who would later settle in Connecticut. Factually, the curse's origin story might be pure fiction, a dramatic prologue invented long after to explain the unexplainable. But legends don't care about facts. They operate on a more primal level, fueled by fear and coincidence. And whether real or imagined, the story of the curse is essential to understanding the psyche of Dudley Town. The belief in the curse is what matters. The story goes that this tainted bloodline eventually made its way to the New World. In the 1740s, a man named Thomas Griffiths first bought the land. But it was the arrival of the Dudley brothers, Gideon, Barzillai, and Abiel, starting in 1747 that gave the small, struggling community its name. They, along with a handful of other families, sought to carve a life out of the unforgiving wilderness. They were pioneers, building their homes and clearing land in this secluded valley. They didn't know, the legend insists, that they had chosen cursed ground. Or perhaps, more chillingly, they had brought the curse with them, and it was now seeping into the soil. The land they chose was, by all accounts, terrible. The soil was thin, rocky, and awful for the kind of farming they needed to survive. The dense forest and surrounding hills trapped the damp air and blocked the sun, making for difficult, gloomy living conditions. From a practical perspective, this settlement was doomed from the start. But for believers, these weren't just agricultural challenges. They were the first signs of the Dudley curse, the first signs that this land would not yield life, only misery. The stage was set. The players were in place. The location, a dark and isolated valley, was chosen. All that was left was for the tragedy to begin. The founding of Dudley Town wasn't the dawn of a prosperous community, it was the start of a slow, agonizing decay. Life for the settlers was a relentless struggle, not just against the poor soil, but against a tide of misfortune that seemed unnaturally frequent. While hardship was common on the American frontier, the sheer concentration of tragedy in this tiny population was, according to lore, statistically impossible. It was as if a malevolent intelligence was actively working to dismantle the community, one family at a time. The curse, it said, didn't show up as a single, dramatic event. It was a creeping plague of the mind. Settlers began to succumb to what was then called madness. The crushing isolation and perpetual gloom of the valley began to take a psychological toll. But the stories insist it was more than just depression. It was a supernatural affliction. One of the first Dudley brothers, Abiel, is often cited as an early victim, eventually losing his fortune and his mind. Then came the deaths. Not peaceful passings, but a litany of suicides, strange accidents, and mysterious illnesses. People would allegedly wander into the dark entry forest and never be seen again. The number of suicides reported in the lore is staggering for such a small community. One of the earliest and most disturbing tales is that of the Nathaniel Carter family. They moved to Dudley Town in 1759. Soon after, a mysterious epidemic swept through, killing several of their relatives. Grief-stricken, the Carters fled, moving to the wilderness of Binghamton, New York, to escape the misery. But the curse, the story goes, isn't tied to a place. It's tied to people. It followed them. Not long after they relocated, the Carter homestead was attacked by Native American raiders. Nathaniel was away, but returned to find his wife and infant child had been brutally murdered and his other children abducted. While such tragedies were a brutal reality of frontier life, for believers, the connection was undeniable. The Carters had lived on cursed ground, and the stain had followed them to their doom. Another story involves a man named Gershon Hollister. In 1792, while helping his neighbor William Tanner build a barn, Hollister suddenly fell from a rafter and was killed. An accident? maybe. But the legend offers a more sinister twist. Some versions whisper that he was murdered by Tanner. Others claim Tanner himself was a victim of the curse, tormented by visions of strange creatures coming from the woods at night until he, too, went insane. Each of these stories, on its own, could be dismissed. But woven together, they form a terrifying pattern of death and despair that seemed to defy logic. The community, never more than a small collection of families, began to shrink. People died, or they fled. The dream of Dudley Town was dying, and a nightmare was taking its place. As the 18th century gave way to the 19th, the curse of Dudley Town seemed to intensify. The list of horrors grew, with each new story adding to the town's dark mythology. The tragedies involved some of the community's most prominent citizens, cementing the idea that no one was safe. Perhaps the most famous tale is that of General Herman Swift, a celebrated hero of the Revolutionary War who had served under George Washington. He settled on a farm near Dudley Town, and for a time, it seemed his prestige might protect him. But the curse, it's said, doesn't care about heroism. In 1804, during a violent thunderstorm, his wife, Sarah Fay, was standing on their front porch when a bolt of lightning struck her dead instantly. The event was shocking, a freak accident. But in the context of Dudley Town's reputation, it was seen as another targeted attack. Overcome with grief, the once great General Swift reportedly descended into madness and died soon after. Skeptics point out that the Swift homestead was technically not in the heart of Dudley Town and the general's so-called insanity could have been age-related dementia. But for storytellers, it was a perfect, tragic addition to the canon. The curse was also said to manifest in slow descents into madness. There's the tale of Mary Cheney, wife of the famous newspaper editor Horace Greeley. Legend often places her as a Dudley Town resident who, driven mad by the curse, committed suicide. This story, however, is one of the most easily debunked. Records clearly show Mary Cheney Greeley never lived in Cornwall, let alone Dudley Town. Yet, the fact her name remains so persistently woven into the legend speaks to the narrative's power to absorb any nearby tragedy. As the 19th century wore on, the town withered. The terrible farming conditions and the lure of more fertile lands out west had taken their toll. One by one, the houses were abandoned. The forest began its slow work of reclaiming the land. By the turn of the 20th century, Dudley Town was officially a ghost town. But the curse wasn't finished. One of the last, and perhaps most chilling, stories is that of the Brophy family. In the early 1900s, John Patrick Brophy lived there with his family, seeking isolation. But peace wasn't to be found. First, his wife died of consumption, or tuberculosis. Shortly after, his 2 children vanished into the surrounding forest, never to be heard from again. John Brophy, now utterly alone, began to unravel. Not long after his children disappeared, his isolated farmhouse mysteriously burned to the ground. In the final act, John Patrick Brophy himself walked into the woods and vanished, never to be seen again. With his disappearance, the last light of human life in Dudley Town was extinguished. Even then, the land wasn't at peace. In the 1920s, a New York doctor named William Clark bought a large parcel of the abandoned land, hoping to build a tranquil weekend getaway. He and others formed the Dark Entry Forest Association to preserve the land. But the darkness had other plans. According to legend, Dr. Clark returned from a trip to the city to find his wife in a state of utter hysteria. She claimed to have been tormented by monstrous creatures emerging from the woods. The experience allegedly left her so traumatized she later took her own life. While records suggest her suicide occurred in New York, the legend places her madness squarely in the haunted woods of Connecticut, another victim claimed by the curse. This endless catalogue of death, disappearance, and insanity, whether factual or embellished, is the very heart of the Dudley Town legend. It's the evidence presented to argue that this was no ordinary failed settlement. This was a place where something went terribly, supernaturally wrong. These stories are deeply unsettling, a mix of historical tragedy and terrifying folklore. Every town has its local legends, its own Dudley Town whispered about on dark nights. What are the haunted stories from your hometown? Share them in the comments below, we'd love to read them. And if this descent into one of America's most forbidden places is holding you in its grip, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. The story of Dudley Town is far from over, and the most famous paranormal investigators in history are about to step onto the scene. For decades, the stories of Dudley Town were mostly a local phenomenon. The town was abandoned, the woods were quiet, and the legend simmered. Then, in the 1970s, two people entered the narrative who would turn that simmer into a raging inferno: Ed and Lorraine Warren. By this time, the Warrens were already famous in the world of the supernatural. Ed was a self-taught demonologist, and Lorraine was a gifted clairvoyant. Together, they had investigated thousands of cases, including the infamous Amityville horror. They were the original ghost hunters, the foremost authorities on all things demonic. And they set their sights on Dudley Town. Their investigation was part of a televised Halloween special, designed for maximum drama. Accompanied by a camera crew, they journeyed into the dark entry forest to confront the evil said to reside there. What they reported was far more terrifying than a simple haunting. Lorraine, using her clairvoyant abilities, allegedly felt an overwhelming wave of misery and negativity. It wasn't just the spirits of the dead settlers she claimed to sense, but something older and profoundly inhuman. She described the place as a vortex of negative energy. Ed Warren, drawing on his expertise, came to a conclusion that would forever seal Dudley Town's reputation. This wasn't a case of restless human spirits. The sheer volume of tragedy, the suicides, the madness, the violent deaths, was, in his view, the hallmark of something demonic. He declared that the land itself was demonically possessed. In the Warrens' framework, demons are non-human entities whose goal is to oppress, terrorize, and ultimately possess human beings to cause suffering. According to Ed, the events in Dudley Town were the direct result of these forces preying on the residents, driving them to madness and self-destruction. During their investigation, the Warrens claimed to have captured photographic evidence of strange mists, swirling lights, and orbs, which they believed were visual proof of the demonic forces. The Warrens' verdict was absolute. They warned the public to stay away from Dudley Town, stating it was a spiritually dangerous place. They believed anyone who entered was at risk of having a malevolent entity latch onto them and follow them home. The impact of their investigation can't be overstated. Their fame lent incredible weight to the legends. It was no longer just old stories, it was a confirmed demonic hotspot, certified by the world's leading experts. This pronouncement opened the floodgates, turning Dudley Town into a pilgrimage site for ghost hunters and thrill seekers. This, in turn, led directly to the massive increase in trespassing and vandalism that forced the owners to close the area. Skeptics, of course, argue that the Warrens were masters of self-promotion. They contend that the Warrens simply took the existing folklore, repackaged it with a demonic twist, and broadcast it to a mass audience. But for many, their word was gospel. The Warrens had placed their demonic seal upon Dudley Town, ensuring its legacy as one of the most terrifying places in America. Even with the land sealed off, the stories continue to leak out from the dark woods. The Prohibition has created a new generation of legends, not of cursed settlers, but of modern-day explorers who have defied the warnings and ventured into the forbidden zone. These contemporary accounts, passed around on internet forums, paint a consistent and chilling picture. One of the most commonly reported phenomena is the overwhelming emotional effect of the place. Visitors speak of being hit by a sudden, crushing wave of sadness and despair the moment they step onto the old town's grounds. Others report an intense, baseless dread, a feeling of being watched by unseen eyes in the dark tree line. Some have even claimed to experience intense paranoia, an eerie echo of the madness that allegedly claimed the original residents. Visual phenomena are also a cornerstone of the modern Dudley Town experience. The most frequent sightings are of shadowy figures moving at the edge of your vision, large, dark masses that dart between trees or emerge from the gaping cellar holes. Then there are the reports of strange lights, glowing orbs, and ethereal mists floating through the woods at night. Some accounts speak of strange, animal-like creatures with glowing eyes peering out from the underbrush, aligning with the historical tales from residents like William Tanner. Auditory phenomena are just as unsettling. Beyond the oppressive silence, visitors have reported hearing disembodied whispers, the faint sound of children crying, or the sharp crack of a twig right behind them, only to turn and find nothing there. Some claim to have been physically affected, feeling phantom touches or sudden, inexplicable drops in temperature. Perhaps most bizarre are the claims of technological malfunction. Ghost hunters armed with cameras and recorders often report that their fully charged batteries will drain in an instant, and their devices will suddenly fail. Of course, these modern accounts are entirely anecdotal. Psychologists would argue it's all suggestion and confirmation bias. When you enter a place you've been told is evil, your brain is primed to interpret every shadow and sound as something paranormal. The oppressive silence could just be the thick forest canopy dampening sound. Yet, the consistency of the stories across decades is hard to ignore. From the first settlers to the Warrens to today's trespassers, the core elements remain the same: a profound sense of dread, shadowy figures, and a feeling that the land itself is hostile to human life. These whispers from the ruins serve as a constant reminder of why Dudley Town is forbidden, not just to protect the land from people, but perhaps, to protect people from the land. So, what's the final truth of Dudley Town? Is it, as the legend screams, a cursed plot of land stained by centuries of demonic activity? A place where a 500-year-old curse drove generations to madness, suicide, and murder? Was it truly the home of shadow creatures and a malevolence so profound that the Warrens themselves declared it demonically possessed? Or is there a more rational truth buried beneath the folklore? Is Dudley Town simply the story of a failed settlement, a victim of bad geography? A community founded on rocky, infertile soil, in a dark valley where farming was nearly impossible? Did its residents succumb not to a curse, but to the very real hardships of disease, isolation, and depression? Historians and skeptics have worked to debunk the legends, pointing out there's no genealogical link to the executed Edmund Dudley, and that many of the supposed tragedies never happened or occurred far from Cornwall. They argue the legend we know today is a modern invention, cobbled together in the 20th century and massively amplified by the Warrens' sensational claims. In this view, the curse is a contagion of stories, not spirits. The feelings of dread and sightings of shadows are just products of the human mind, primed by spooky tales while standing in a dark, quiet forest. The area is closed off not because of ghosts, but because of the very real problems of vandalism and trespassing caused by the legend itself. But the truth might lie somewhere in the murky space between. Perhaps the harsh, gloomy environment did create a psychological darkness that, over generations of hardship, calcified into a belief that the land was evil. Perhaps the stories, even if not factually true, hold a deeper truth about our fear of the unknown, of failure, and of the darkness within ourselves. Today, Dudley Town remains silent, its secrets protected by a thick canopy of trees and stern legal warnings. The stone foundations and cellar holes are the only true witnesses, and they aren't talking. Whether cursed or simply unlucky, the town has become a powerful symbol. It exists more as an idea than a place, a dark corner of our collective imagination. And maybe that's for the best. Maybe some gates are better left forever closed.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like and subscribe button, and then share with your friends. Your support helps us grow and create even more awesome content. We appreciate you being part of the journey. Here are a couple more videos for you to check out.